Hi there, and welcome back. When you look at a pile of photocopies, a scattering of notes and an overfull bibliography, then writing even, in this example, 2,500 to 3,000 words can seem a daunting task. But approach it in the right way, and it's just like writing, well, 2,500 to 3,000 words. I usually make a distinction between two ways of working, which I call the mosaic method and the sculpture method. The mosaic method is the usual way students are trained. Read as much as you need, take notes to help you later on, and when all of that is done, start writing. Now, when doing a larger piece of work, such as an MA or a PhD thesis, this becomes a 4 or 5 stage process. Read, make notes, research, make lots more notes, write. I call this the mosaic method because you're not allowed to begin the final stage of writing until you've assembled all the pieces. Now let me say this once. This is not very efficient, and the longer the piece of work, the greater are the penalties in lost time and wasted effort, which is probably the single greatest reason why PhD completion rates are so bad. Now the alternative is the sculpture method. You start with reading. Well, you have to start somewhere, but you do not take notes. Instead, you place rough drafts of the material where you think it ought to be in your assignment. And you continue until you've got everything down that you think you'll need. And then you start writing. It's like chipping away at the stone until you arrive at the approximate shape, and then the fine chiseling begins. Now, drafts are simply bits of text. Make no effort at this stage to perfect the language. Save that pace of creativity for later. But the text does need to be placed where you think it's going to be in your final piece of work. This means that as you add pieces, they need to be put in some sort of order, and that there is some logic connecting the bits together. And I often use what I call link words, and I put them in capital letters. I use "and" for extra information, "but" for information that modifies what was written before, "because" information that causes what was written before, and "despite" information that might derail what was written before but doesn't. Now there are lots of words that convey the same meaning, but you can save that for later on too. Now, 2 points of warning. First, note the source of each bit as you do it. The author, the year, and the pages. Note it in brackets after each piece. If you don't do it at this time, it's a much bigger pain trying to do it later on. And second, when you copy-paste, remember that you've done so. Highlight it in a color. Not too much copying because it probably won't survive long. Eventually, you'll have to write it down in your own words. But if you don't, and you leave it as it is, you'll be guilty of plagiarism, and we'll deal with this later on. Of course, if you're going to put drafts into a text, you need a plan. But you've already got one. Yes, you do. Remember those research questions? Well, these are the bones of the plan. So let's see how we can use that plan, and we'll stay with the idea of a 3,000-word assignment. Well, let's start with the introduction and conclusion and give them 10% each. That leaves 2,400 words. And if we split them among 2 hypotheses, we can allocate 1,200 words to each. If we have 3, then obviously the room for each is less. Now, I've further broken down the plan into argument, evidence, and counter-argument. And remember, like the research question, this isn't written in stone. But if you decide to allocate more to one part, you'll have to make adjustments elsewhere. Now, let's go back and connect the plan with the drafts that you're making. And here is one rule. A draft should ideally be no more than twice the size of the target text, and it should never be more than 3 times that size. Now, if you follow this scheme, there are 8 distinct advantages. Firstly, it forces you to question what you write down. because in the end you'll simply run out of words. Secondly then, it forces you to interact constantly with your material. It's the easiest thing in the world to keep writing notes, but the object is to write a thesis, not to copy other people's text into your own handwriting. The third advantage then is that it cuts down waste. The text you'll never use, the time in writing it down and transcribing it into your argument. Fourthly, it allows you to target any knowledge gaps early on. To send a signal, hey, I need to know this or else I'm stuck, and to target that extra material you'll need. Fifthly, it keeps you abreast of your assignment. You're always adding to it. It's always progressing in some way and moving forward. And sixth then, it provides its own learning curve. If you see that a draft is becoming too large, you cut it back before going on. So next time you'll draft more precisely or select the material more carefully. The seventh advantage is that it gives you a progress indicator. How far have you got? Oh, well, about 2/3 drafted. How far do you have to go? 1/3 left. And this brings us to an eighth advantage. You're forced to become output oriented. The effort that you take and the work that you do is tied to the output, not to the input. I've drafted 2/3 of my thesis. Not, I've been working every day for the last 5 days, but I don't know where we are at all in my thesis. Now, writing then comes at the end. And you shouldn't start writing until everything you need is in the draft section. So before you start, make sure that it's complete. So ideally, you shouldn't need your source material again. So you've hewn down the subject to the shape that you want it. And now there's the pure joy of creation. You are in control. You shape the overall logic. You present the evidence and you shape the arguments. And you don't have to wait to the end. You can write up individual pieces as they're ready. Now, one final warning. Keep drafting and writing as two separate concepts and as two separate processes. And make sure it's all your own work. Next time, we'll look at the tricky issue of plagiarism and how to avoid it.